All right, friends, I have that it's time, so we're going to jump off and get started. It's so good to see you today and to be here in person. I had the most unusual of weeks. What happened was last Wednesday morning, after completing the Bible study in the morning, as I came off the platform after answering questions, I noticed a lot of severe abdominal pain, and it was very odd. I went out kind of walking with Judy back over to the office, and I didn't quite know what was going on. I called Laura, and she told me, well, get some crackers, walk around, drink a lot of water. So I did. I went into another meeting for a while, and then about lunchtime, it was just getting really, really bad. Laura was off, and thank goodness she was, because she came up here to check on me and found a little spot just right by my belly button that was kind of elevated in there and all that. I can count on my one hand how many times in our marriage that the nurse I'm married to, who's an ER nurse, has ever said that we need to go to the hospital. Most of the time, it's the opposite. Like, oh no, this is not really an emergency. You need to go to your primary care physician. It's not that big a deal. This time, she's like, Brad, we're going to the hospital now. I said, am I gonna die? And she said, no, but you do need to get this, what they call reduced. Now, friends, I would not wish a reduction of a hernia on my worst enemy. Okay, it was kind of not a pleasant thing, but it would have been a really fun evening had I been here after they had given me the morphine to relax me and all that and do all that. So I do apologize for that. This Friday, I'm going to have a procedure to sew that spot in my stomach up and to make that repair on this Friday morning. Next Wednesday, though, to complete, we are going to finish Mark. You don't know, I was going to tell you this evening that we already had a guest for the 6th, and that is Reverend Jennifer Groh will be here to do that, because I had a board meeting over at SMU I was going to have to be at next Wednesday. So she was already going to bring that session. So just to let you know, that will continue, that will be here, and nothing is going to happen to her, okay, in the meantime. So pray for her. Oh, thank you. I know the prayers, the kindness have been great. And again, I just want to personally apologize to anybody who didn't get the email or information before that evening. I would have been here if all I could have. So thank you very much. I just wanted to share with you that, again, I'm so sorry about that. We tried to reach everyone, but I know we didn't catch everyone before they arrived. So again, my deepest apologies. The second thing I wanted to bring to you, somebody asked me about Sunday, about how I was doing, and they said, Brad, were you in a lot of pain? I noticed a little tear in your eye occasionally as you were liturgist on Sunday. Being liturgist was actually regularly scheduled and planned, but many of you know Janice Rubin, and she passed away last week, and being back in the space without her there, it just wasn't the same. Janice was kind of acting head usher. She told me if I had ever promoted her to head usher, she would quit and leave the church, right? So she was unwilling to do that. But any kind of emotion I had, any feeling I had, was because of her and missing her in that moment. So was deeply saddened by that. And so in my experience there, I just wanted to share with that. But I so appreciate all of your prayers and support and kindness. And as I move forward, I'm going to obviously obey, which is not my strong suit, but I have a medical professional at the house, and I'm going to try to do that. But while I'm at this place, I thought, since we just right outside the door have a beautiful yes and amen prayer collection going, sharing with DeAndre's book, tonight I wanted to open with this prayer. And again, I've got kind of Janice on my mind, and as well as just those times where we don't know what to say. You're going to see in today's passages, Jesus seems to know what to say, and the urgency as he approaches the cross just gets raised more and more. And so for that, I like this prayer. For those of you who just bought the book, if you want to join me on page 71, it's there, but I'll read it now. Let us pray. Lord, sometimes I don't even know what to say. I want to say thank you, but the words seem inadequate. I want to say yes, Lord, but the words seem hasty. I want to say I'm sorry, but the words seem disingenuous. I want to say I love you, but the words seem superficial. I want to say so much, but the words never quite match. Maybe I'm using too many words, or maybe the words aren't the problem. Fix my heart, Lord, so that my words may match both the work you're doing in me and the work you intend to do through me. And in your mercy, please let me know when I'm doing too much. Amen. A couple of weeks ago, when I was visiting Janice in the hospital there at Houston Methodist West, had a moment where we were talking, and if you knew Janice at all, she'd be talking about one thing, and then suddenly she'd just switch topics to another thing, and then to another thing, and she'd kind of jump around with you a little bit, and suddenly out of nowhere, she just pointed to a little laptop that was right there beside her, and said, I never realized how powerful worship was. I never understood until I couldn't be there doing it, how powerful it is. And it just really touched me. And so this week, when I was trying to come back too early after they had reduced that hernia for me, Laura said, it was like I was a little kid. She's like, Brad, you're not going to get to go on to the party on Sunday if you try to get up too quickly now. And so that's there. So that was kind of how it went. But friends, I want to bring us into the Gospel of Mark again as we jump in, and as we've done, I know you're ready for the quiz. You've been prepared. I want to remind you as we get to slide 2 of what you already know. Who is Jesus in the Gospel of Mark? It's on the slide for you in red letters, right? Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, right? If you don't get anything else out of Mark, Mark is trying to show you that Jesus is the Son of God, the Messiah, okay? Now, on the next question, you've answered this one right about Jesus talking to different groups throughout the gospel, but today you're going to get a little bit of a curveball. Jesus is going to speak to some of the groups. He's going to speak to the scribes, the disciples, the Pharisees, the people in crowd, as he has always. But this time, what's unusual in Mark is you'll hear him this week talk to the Sadducees. A new group is introduced just out of nowhere. And so we'll talk about that for a little bit. But as we do, there's something that Jesus does that we do every day. So I know that you always prepare when you cross city limits. So every time you head out to Sugar Land or go to Galveston or leave the Houston city limits, you prepare to enter the city, don't you? No? No, well, I mean, kind of, right? I mean, if you're going to go anywhere for any distance, you get ready, you make sure you got gas in the car, you got a plan, you know where you're going. Anybody use Waze or a map or something to help them get there? You have to have like a pattern or pathway, but we probably don't prepare. What I want to tell you about this is when we read that Jesus enters the city, it's not just him going in or out here. There's something really important happening. Now, what if I ask you, has anybody here been part of a parade? Okay. Now, have any of you been part of like an inaugural parade? Ever participated in swearing in someone for an office or public office? Okay, that's more of what this is like, okay? There's going to be a lot of things that when we hear them, they don't necessarily make sense about why Jesus is doing them. But if you understand that to the people at the time, every one of these things that Jesus does would have meant something or been an important symbol that demonstrates something, what you're going to find is it's continually pointing to Jesus being the Messiah, the Son of God, okay? So it's going to fulfill that and do that. So let's just say Jesus is preparing. He starts up on the Mount of Olives at a place called Bethphage, and Bethphage is the house of unripened figs. Because that's what we all want to do, is go to the house of unripened figs. Has anybody ever eaten a fig? How many of y'all have eaten figs, right? How many of you have eaten an unripened fig? They are as bitter as all get out. Oh my goodness, they're horrible. And if you're like I was, and you would always try to pick them too early off a tree, you end up hating figs because you think all of them are like that, right? You never get a sweet fig. Anyway, bit of a problem there. But yeah, this kind of house of unripe figs, not a good name for a town. And then Jesus sends 2 disciples with some very specific instructions. He says, there's going to be a colt, right? So a young unridden donkey in town. Go get it, bring it back to me. Say the Lord has need of it. Now, what you're not thinking about is that in that time, the Lord has need of it would mean something. That was like saying, hey, I'm not the master, but I have a master, and he is needing it. And don't worry, we're going to borrow it for a minute. But the person on the other side is going to expect payment. They're going to expect that not only is the donkey going to be taken care of, but because of the class of the people and who's borrowing it, that again, that's going to be taken care of. So here I just want to show you kind of where we are when we're in Bethphage. This kind of picture here is taken from the Mount of Olives there at Bethphage, where it was, the village, looking back over. Now it's a little university area, and there's a beautiful scenic overlook that everyone goes to. I want to point out to you, this is the Kidron Valley that runs between the Mount of Olives and then the city of Jerusalem. The city of Jerusalem back there, you see that big, long wall, all of it that you can see. See this little wall up here, all the way down where the Dome of the Rock, the big mosque is there in the middle, all the way over to this precipice. That is all the Temple Mount that Herod built. Okay, so all of that would have been present in Jesus's time. And then what you have in these walls are you have walls that were built in about the 12th century when they were repaired. But the real heavy lifting that built the site was done in the time of the Romans. And then you have a pathway that goes down from Bethphage, and see where these trees are kind of over here in this corner that kind of runs down there? That's where you would want to go. If you're trying to get a picture of the scale of the picture here, I just would point out to you that you see that little kind of black windows right there in the middle. That's a bus that can hold 30 people easily, just to give you an idea of how big it is. Several hundred meters there. There's some question marks about where things were. We're pretty certain that where the mosque of the Dome of the Rock, there in the middle, that's where the temple at the time of Herod was. Where the Anatolian fortress, the Roman fortress that they kind of offended all the Jews by building this big place to keep troops on the Temple Mount, where that was is a little bit debated. People used to think it was over here on the left side, but now they tend to think it's more over on the right side. But that's always been scholarly fought over. But I just wanted you to see, like when Jesus is there and it says he's going to enter Jerusalem, there's a kind of a valley he's got to cross to get there. And he's going to go into this place seeing it as a thing. So unlike Houston, that this is this vast, just a amalgam of people, just for as far as the eye can see, these ancient cities that were walled had a kind of a clear boundary of what was and wasn't the city. And so to go into that meant in some ways that you're submitting yourself to the authority or principalities or powers of that place. So he's going into that city. So the thing that's really unusual in this kind of story, so we're here at Bethphage, we're on the Mount of Olives, and then we get 2 disciples, and Mark reports that they do what Jesus told them to do. That never happens in Mark's gospel. Remember all the head slapping last week. We get 2 obedient disciples. So here they go and they get, that's an unridden colt right there, a picture of one from online. They find this colt, they untie it. Somebody asks them about it, and in the asking about it, they say what Jesus ordered them to say. That the master has need of it, and they said, oh, we'll take it because you'll bring it back. You see, because what's really going on is they all know what this means. If he's getting a colt That means Zechariah chapter 9, verse 9 of the prophecy is being fulfilled, that here comes the one who is going to fulfill the work of the Lord. This is going to be the new Messiah, the anointed one, who's going to enter Jerusalem and bring about the day of the Lord. They place their cloaks on the donkey, okay? Not to make Jesus comfortable, but as a symbol of their fidelity to Jesus. Then some, because they can't all put their cloaks on the donkey, take their cloaks and they lay them down in front of the donkey so the donkey can walk on them, okay? Now think about what a cloak is. In that time, if you traveled like they had from Galilee down to Jerusalem, it would have had in it everything you owned. You would have had two garments on, a tunic underneath, right? And then a cloak over the top. You probably slept in your cloak if you were traveling outside, and then you wore it to keep you warm, okay? In that cloak would have been all the tools you had, all your money, everything you took with you when you traveled. And they're laying that down in front of them. I want to ask you too something that if you've heard me preach a Palm Sunday sermon, you're gonna hear it. Do y'all know Yosemite Sam? And he would say, jumping what? Jehoshaphat. Do you know who Jehoshaphat was? All right, Jehoshaphat is Yehu's daddy. He's his father, okay? And this guy, Yehu, was the rightful king who had a prophet come to him and anoint him. I give you the reference here. You can see it in 2 Kings about chapter 9. And he gets anointed. But he's hanging out with a bunch of friends. If you're nice to them, they're the rightful king. Think of him like a Robin Hood court. If you're not nice to them and you don't like Yehu, you're going to say it's a group of like teenage thugs, right? But anyway, this group that's running around, Yehu is kind of at the center of them. This prophet says, I need to talk to you, comes, grabs Yehu out of them, and then puts oil over his head. And if he anoints him with oil, that makes him the Messiah. All Messiah means is anointed one, right? The rightful king of Israel. And you see this play out in David's story over and over again, right? And so he gets anointed. He comes back and his buddies are all like, hey, where you been, Yehu? What was going on? What did that holy dude want with you? Just like any kids would. You know, they're like kind of poking at him. He's like, oh yeah, he just anointed me with some oil. Oh my. And so then they all say, then you're the king. And what do? They take their cloaks off and lay them in front. It became a tradition that was followed anytime a king was coronated. You see, this is a royal procession and parade. We may not know why they're doing what they're doing, but they know why they're doing what they're doing. The other thing is we tend to think of, because when we see it depicted on a screenplay or in acting or in other things, that there were just a handful of people here. But remember, this is happening in a city of about 50,000 people at a time of a great festival when almost as many more had tried to come into the place. They are surrounded by people everywhere. And in the middle of that, they host a coronation parade. And they put it on right in the middle. You can understand why the authorities are scared to death. They are doing things that say Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God. Okay? And it keeps going. They also sing a song out of the Psalms. It's a song that's sung at the time of the coronation of kings. They adapt it a little bit. I give you the reference there. And then Jesus enters the holy city and goes into the temple. And in every other gospel account, he does something. What does he do when he gets in the temple? You remember? What does he do? Flips over the tables. Yeah, thank you. It's there. I totally forgot Mark's account is different. And when I was researching for tonight, I was like, wow, I was shocked, okay? Mark's account is totally different. And what I pointed out to many people about Mark is, remember, it moves at a quick pace. It goes. It always has a point, and it seems to be so fast. So if it slows down and includes something that's not in the other Gospels, pay attention, because it's something really important. So here what happens is, day one, they enter the city, and all of them go in it. They've gotten this parade going. They've had all these crowds. Jesus gets into the temple. He looks around and sees everything going on, realizes that it's late, and he and the disciples leave and go back out of town to rest for the night. Does anybody remember that? Have you heard a good sermon about that? I mean, it's just kind of odd. It just jumped out to me. I couldn't believe it. But there's something that's going to happen here. I mean, I think I put on the slide, what? Like, I don't remember Jesus not doing something, like leaving. But hold on. There's going to be 3 days where Jesus goes into the city and then leaves the city. And then there's a second day he's going to go into the city and leave the city in Mark. And a third day he's going to go into the city and leave a city. And on the fourth day, something major happens where he's brought back into the city to be crucified. And then following the crucifixion, there's going to be something where for 3 days, right? You remember? So for Mark, there's a symmetry in the before and the after. And this makes sense if you think about Genesis in the account of the Jewish mind. It has 3 levels, right? That 1, 2, 3. So it's an important kind of understanding, and you're going to see this coming out in Mark. So I want you to know what's going on there. So now we're on day 2, and this is in slide 9 here, about verse 12. You'll see that Jesus goes in, and there's this fig tree. Now, what did Bethphage mean again? You thought I was just giving you some additional information, just throwing it out there. It means what? Unripened figs. So Jesus then comes across a fig tree, but the fig tree has leaves on it. Now, the way fig trees work is they produce fruit first and leaves second, which makes them unusual. So if you see leaves on this type of fig tree, you would expect it to have fruit, whether it was in season or out of season. The tree looks like something it isn't. Okay? And so this tree there that's looking like it isn't, we're told Jesus is hungry. He goes searching around the tree, and there are no figs, so Jesus curses the fig tree. And the King James Version says it the best. He says, "Bear ye no fruit no more." I mean, just boom. It's beautiful. Mark's account's kind of interesting. Mark says the disciples heard him say that. Like it stuck with them. They hear him do this. And then we move instantly into the temple, okay? I want you to know also, too, the fig tree is a symbol of first century Judaism, specifically the rabbinic tradition. It was common, and you'll hear in Paul's account of being raised at the feet of Gamaliel, being under the fig tree as being a sign that you were under the leadership or teaching of someone. So there's a definite metaphor here to that tradition, okay? It's an intended metaphor, and you'll see what I mean in just a second. So we go in slide 10 and about verse 15, Jesus drives out those now buying and selling in the temple, and so there he's doing that. Now, as I tried to show in that other picture, that temple ground is vast. It's almost as large as if you took all of MDUMC's property and put it in one place, it's like that size. It's a vast complex. And so it becomes kind of hard to know how he did it. Did he just flip over some tables and everyone got afraid, and so everybody said, hey, there's a crazy dude over there, let's stop, right? Or did he have a group of other people who helped him and he literally shut down? Because in Mark, we get an illusion where it says very clearly that all the traffic, he turns over the tables of the money changers, sellers of doves, and it says literally in verse 16, no one could carry anything to the temple. Everything stops. Now, let's look a little bit for a second. Why do you have to have money changers there on the temple ground? The number one reason is at that time, if you had money, all money was coin money. They didn't really have paper money yet. And not only was it coin money, if you wanted to exchange goods and services for coin, the coin had to have the current emperor on it. Recently in France, I was watching a great YouTube video on this the other day. In one of the towns in France, in one of the rivers, on the bottom, they found this boat that had all these old gold coins that had been docked along the side, and they couldn't believe that nobody had found these old Roman coins. And what they found out about the boat was it had been lost because it was bringing old coins to a mint to have them re-stamped, because you couldn't use the old coins. So unlike today, where all of us want to have George Washington, even though he's not been president for a while. Y'all know that, right? Right, we want to have him on. No, you don't want George Washington. You don't want Benjamin Franklin on yours, right? Even though he was never president, right? You want those bills to use, all right? You want something that looks like that. In those days, what they would do instead is they would have to change them out with whoever was currently ruling. You think our politicians have ego trips today? Oh, no. Back then, much, much worse, but it was a sign of authority, right? But here's the problem. In the temple, and especially what you put in the treasury, you could not use engraven images. It's forbidden. It's like idol worship. So what they would do is they'd have to come exchange their money to be able to make an offering. So they would get holy money to be able to put in the offering, okay? Likewise, you had an issue with doves, okay? People who were poor in the Bible didn't offer cattle. You weren't always slaughtering cattle and sheep. If you had either a lesser sin, or you were poor, or you could get a priest to say you were poor enough, because nobody here ever tries to evade taxes. I know y'all always pay everything you have to. You don't hire accountants or ever try to not lower your tax burden. Y'all wouldn't do that, right? Right, of course not. I mean, we all do, right? I mean, maybe I'm the only bad person, but I know I would. So but that's what was going on here. So they would trade in doves to do the minimal for the sacrifice. It was a way to do less than you were actually ordered to do by the law, right? So it's there. So all that's going on. And then we're told that Jesus then, after he stopped everything, there's this massive crowd, and Jesus begins teaching. And he teaches this, and you can see this on verse 17. Is it not written, my house shall be called a house of prayer for all the nations, but you have made it a den of robbers? Well, needless to say, the chief priests and the scribes become afraid because the crowd was spellbound by their teaching. And there's a point at which you realize you're outnumbered, right? So they continue to seek a way to kill him. And evening came, and Jesus and his disciples again leave that. But they've wanted to kill him, but now they're getting kind of mad. All right. So how many days has it been? We had the first day with the big parade. He goes in and he sees the city. Second day, he cleanses it. And then the third day, he's going to teach in it. Is there a lordly or kingly office, a priestly prophetic office, a teaching office that are in the nature of Jesus Christ, that are part of what it's expected of the Messiah? There's a great sermon by John Wesley on these. You see, Mark is often downplayed as not being overly theological. They try to put him first or early because they think he's just in a hurry to tell you the story and doesn't do anything masterful with how he tells it. But here you have very clearly Jesus fulfilling everything that was necessary to be the Messiah, the Son of God, and the theology and what they call Christology, the understanding of who Jesus is as high as it can possibly be. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. So anyway, they're going to try to kill him. They're there. As they come out of the city, though, Peter kind of notices what the other disciples notice, but he's willing to speak up. Okay? Hey, Jesus, there's that fig tree you zapped the other day. And he's gobsmacked because it's dead from the roots up. Like it had all those leaves, and now it's all dead. And Jesus just can't believe him. He's like, have faith in God. Of course. I mean, Jesus is like, of course it's dead. Of course. He explains about a mountain, about moving a mountain, that if you have faith, you can move the mountain, right? And then he says the oddest thing that somehow we always just leave out of that part. We look at these kind of demonstrations of power and we kind of separate them from the rest of it. But the next thing he says is kind of fascinating. He says, every time you stand up to pray in the temple, make sure that you've forgiven everyone that you need to forgive. I mean, what's that about? Well, I think very clearly what it's about is him saying, well, you think it's a big deal to curse a fig tree and to have it dry up and die? That's nothing. You think it's a really challenging thing to take the mountain and throw it into the sea? You don't really understand. To be reconciled to other people and to forgive so that you might be forgiven. That's the challenge. And in case there needed to be an exclamation point on that, in slide 13 and verse 26 of chapter 11, we have an odd thing. How many of your Bibles have verse 26? Y'all have it in your Bible? Or let me say, how many of you don't have it? So we got several who don't have it, several who do, right? So if you have it in there, what verse 26 says, but if you do not forgive, neither will your Father in heaven forgive your trespasses. Right? We've heard that before, right? So if you go back to Mark chapter 6, verse 15, as Jesus is teaching the Lord's Prayer, he says, we pray, Lord, forgive us. How do we say that? Forgive us our trespasses. What? How? As we have forgiven. No, that's not what I wanted to say. I don't want God to forgive like I forgive, or don't forgive, as the case may be. I wanted to say, forgive our trespasses as only you can do, Jesus. You're the only one who can forgive. I don't want to say, make me have to forgive. But what if conforming our will to the will of God and letting God do more in us than we can ever imagine is the heart of prayer? And so it has to be there so that we become forgiven as forgiven. So anyway, it's not in the earliest manuscripts in Greek, the ones that we date to the oldest dates, but it was added because it does match chapter 6, verse 15. But a lot of Bibles don't have it. But I just want you to know, we get a lot of people who want to kind of get a name it, claim it mentality with things. But what Jesus is talking about is forgiveness and conforming our will to God, not getting God to be our gopher. Okay? It's an important point, especially in this city at this time. Some of the other ministries here. Let's go to slide 14. We go back into Jerusalem one more time. Jesus is outnumbered. Okay? Now the chief priests, the scribes, and the elders, they all come to Jesus. They meet him this morning. It's the third morning. They've had enough. They've gotten courage. They question Jesus' authority. By what authority do you do these things? I mean, friends, if somebody ran in on a Sunday morning and tried to grab the mic during one of the services on either campus, both our ushers and security would be questioning their authority. Like, you get it, right? I mean, like, you would expect them to, right? So there's a question of authority. Jesus says, well, I'll answer your question if you answer my question. And suddenly these chief priests, scribes, and elders look up and they see Jesus, his disciples, and the whole crowd. And friends, now who's outnumbered? Maybe them. Jesus asks them before they can even answer if they're up for it. Did the baptism of John come from heaven, or was it of human origin? Answer me. Well, the chief priests, the scribes, and the elders argued with one another. That's what they do. How many channels do we have on TV that will tell you what you think you want to hear, where they argue all day long with no solutions? Imagine if we took all of our religion and all of our politics and all of our science and wrapped them together and made the same people in charge. Well, we kind of do that, but that's a whole nother matter. But like, my goodness. So of course they're arguing and can't agree on anything. It's crazy. And if we say from heaven, he'll say, why didn't y'all believe? If we say human, the crowd will regard John the Baptist as a prophet. They realize they're caught. And so they think they'll outfox Jesus because that's worked for him so far. And they say, we don't know. To which Jesus says, then neither will you know the authority by which I do these things. Now, friends, we've had the scribes and the Pharisees and the temple president before back up in Galilee questioning Jesus' authority. By what authority do you cast out these demons? We claim it's by Beelzebub. How do you do that? And Jesus says, a house divided against itself cannot, right? Remember that? Right? He said, I cast them out because I am the Messiah, the Son of God. And even the demons know that. Right? So we don't have a problem telling them where the authority comes from. It's what needs to happen. Again, remember, Jesus was not killed for being a nice person. Jesus was killed by confronting a system that was broken. And so here it is. Neither will I tell you by what authority I'm doing these things. And in case it wasn't enough, I mean, like calling them out like that is something, right? And challenging their authority. But then he says something kind of crazy. He says, so now let me tell you a story. And he says, there was this man who planted a vineyard. And he puts a fence around it. He dug a pit for the wine press. He built a watchtower. He then leased the vineyard. He went to another country. I mean, friends, when you hear that story, who did all the work? The vineyard owner, right? It's right there. And then this in verse 2 here, we're in chapter 12, verse 2, slide 17. The vineyard owner tries to collect his share. The vineyard owner has gone off to this foreign land. He sends someone back, his slaves, to collect. So the first slave, we're told, is seized and beaten. One is beaten over the head and insulted. The next one was killed. I mean, that's horrible, friends. When would you stop trying to collect what you were owed if you were the vineyard owner? How many people would you send? We're told in verse 5, chapter 12, verse 5 of Mark, and so it was with many others. Some they beat and others they killed. He kept sending them. Think about who Mark is writing to in that first century Roman church. He is writing to people, many of whom will die for their faith. And he's sharing with them the importance of going, because the vineyard owner did all the work. It's a beautiful parable that Jesus tells at this point that's also useful and copied down because it was what drove the early church. So then there was nothing left for the vineyard to do with all these slaves having been killed, all of his wealth and prosperity having been lost. And so we're told in verse 6, finally, he realized he had this other, a beloved son, and he thought to himself, they will respect my son. And so he sends his son. You know that the tenants see something different. They see an opportunity. Hey, if we kill this son, there will be no heir. We'll get the property, we'll have squatters' rights, we'll keep it. So they seize him, kill him, and throw him out of the vineyard. Jesus asks, what then will the owner of the vineyard do? And here you expect the crowd to answer. You expect the chief priests, the scribes, or the Pharisees to answer. But there in your red letter Bible, you know what it's going to say? Jesus says he will come and destroy the tenants and give the vineyard to others. Boom. Imagine what that was like. Those wanting to kill him right there. And he says this to him. You think they had additional resolve now? The danger. What did the crowd think? Well, on that Temple Mount in slide 19, you'll see a picture here. There's always been politics. You'll see the Dome of the Rock here, the gold over that. Oh, we got slide 19? Yeah, here it is. Here, I'm showing you this beautiful picture of a colonnade with the mosque behind it. The colonnade was built by people who owned this little strip to block your view of the other thing behind it out of spite. There's no real good reason for it to be there. It's a highly contested area. It's well fought over. But what I want you to know about these kind of politics, Jesus asks, have you not read this scripture? The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. This was the Lord's doing, and it is amazing in our eyes. You see, the Lord is the vineyard owner, right? We are the vineyard. We are the fruit of the harvest of the vineyard. You see, the story here about the tenants is about, again, what they know to be true, that it's the chief priests, the scribes, and the Pharisees who are taking all of the land and all of the things and exploiting the people and the things of God for their own purpose. And we're really told in verse 12, these groups, they realized that Jesus had told this parable against them. They wanted to arrest him then and there, but they couldn't because they were afraid of the crowd. They're outnumbered. They sent him some Pharisees and Herodians to trap Jesus because, that's gone great for him so far again, right? But they send him. So here we get in slide 20, it's on verses 14 and 15. Michael said this really well on Sunday. If you haven't seen that message that he brought, I would encourage you to watch that online. You got two really great messages this last Sunday. It was a joy to hear. Michael did this good thing. He said it was almost like they start with flattery, so it's almost like they walked up to Jesus and said, "Hey, Jesus, have you lost weight? You look good," and that kind of stuff. I mean, they were trying to make it sound all flourish. We know you are sincere and you speak from truth. So tell us what we should do, right? It's beautiful. But I'd also commend to you DeAndre's sermon Sunday that was phenomenal, lights out, about process. I've never heard the coin as a process, but it was just really beautiful. You see, they thought, did these Jews with those coins with images that they weren't allowed to have or supposed to have, that they could get away with it as long as they never looked at them. They could kind of use the coins, but just don't look at them closely. Don't observe them. So it's interesting that the first thing Jesus tells them to do is to bring him a coin and to look at it. because we have many things in our lives that we would rather listen to the pundits on TV or hear some far off noise or have it in the background instead of actually looking at it, learning about it, and going deep into it to know what's actually going on. But it's interesting that the first thing Jesus tells them is look at it up close. The second thing then that Jesus does is he speaks about it. He speaks to it and gives a word. Because when you look at it, you're going to, as a follower of Jesus, have to confront, what do you do about what Jesus says about it? Or what Jesus would say about it? And then finally, when you put it back in your pocket, you got to kind of own it, that you have it. And are you going to do what Jesus said to do with it or about it? And I just thought, again, if you get a chance, it'll be, both of those are 15 to 25 minutes, and I'll let you know who did which one. You can guess or take your odds on who did. But they're both of them were great sermons and worth it. But DeAndre's, that imagination there, I just thought was brilliant. I would commit it to you. Both of them are available on our YouTube channels. They are every week. But what can we learn from a coin? You know, Jesus says, give to the emperor the things that are the emperor's and to God the things that are God's. And they were amazed because you then have to think, what of my life belongs to God and what of my life belongs to the emperor? And who am I going to give what to? You've got to make a decision. Mark is all about pressing you continually to have to make a decision. Because remember, he's not claiming Jesus is a nice guy who helps you have a better life. He's claiming Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God. And it matters in how you live your life, the decisions you make, and the choices you have. So now we get the Sadducees approaching Jesus. Now I say the Sadducees haven't been mentioned in Mark. That's probably because for Mark, Herodians and Sadducees are synonymous. Sadducees definitely would fit in the category of Herodians. They are people who are, when you say Sadducees, think of the old term of sellouts. Do you know that nowadays to be a sellout is considered a good thing? That means you like sell out stadiums or you sell your merchandise on YouTube or all that. Now, was anybody old enough to remember when being a sellout was considered a bad thing? Right? It means you cared more about marketing and making money than you did about the art or what was true, right? So Sadducees are kind of sellouts. The other thing is too, they get along great with Rome. They love all things Greek. They have offices, they get along, they're traders, they're well-to-do, and they love being around the temple. They wouldn't even mind Caesarea Maritima. They'd go hang out with the Romans for the weekend, especially if they got invited to one of the villas, all right? These people don't have a problem getting down with the wealthy. And so here you have this Sadducees approach, and they ask Jesus a question. And the only time they're named, they ask a very technical question because only they could make this up, okay? They don't believe in the resurrection. And the reason they say they don't believe in the resurrection is because of this. In the law of Moses, when people get married, okay, if a man dies and he and his wife haven't had children yet, it is the surviving brother's responsibility to marry the now widowed wife and to give her children. Now, it doesn't matter if he has wives already, okay? That's his responsibility. And so what they say is, hey, master, teacher, you're so smart. Let me tell you why you shouldn't believe in the resurrection because of this. There were these 7 brothers, and the first brother got married, and then he died. They didn't have any children. And so the second brother married her and didn't have any children. The third, and it went on in succession through all 7. It said, when they get to the day of resurrection and they're eternally with God, whose wife is she? Right? You see, there can be no resurrection because that's how it works. It's illogical, right? It can't fit. Think here, it's like when they were arguing about how many angels could fit on the head of a pin. I mean, it's pointless. Or could God make something so heavy that God couldn't pick it up, right? It's that kind of silliness, right? But they think they've made their point. And remember how I said Mark did all this kind of head slapping when he talked to the disciples? I think right here when he talks to the Sadducees, I think he might have also done a head slap. He'll say this in verse 24. Jesus said to them, "Is not this the reason that you are wrong, that you know neither the scriptures nor the power of God?" I mean, he's saying, like, guys, y'all just don't get it, right? The resurrected neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels in heaven, right? They aren't angels, remember, because as we're told, they get lifted above the angels in heaven, right? And as for being the dead being raised, have you not read in the book of Moses, I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He is not God of the dead, but of the living. You are quite wrong. And while he's saying that, a scribe walks up. These are human Xerox machines. In this slide, I've got a picture of a first century one leaning over and making his copies there and doing his work. And as he's leaning there, he's like, Jesus, I love what you just did to the Sadducees, because the scribes know the law and the rules, and they can't stand these slackard little Sadducees. They're tired of them, right? And so he's like, which commandment, teacher, is the first of all? And Jesus answered, the first is, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. What does that start? That starts something like, is that at the beginning of the Ten Commandments? I think it is in Deuteronomy's version. Certainly it's also at the beginning right now, hear, O Israel. Is that what's called the Shema? That talks about the most important thing you can do is to love God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. The second commandment also found in Deuteronomy. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. There's no other greater commandment than this. I mean, y'all know these, right? Y'all got them on a water wall as you walk into the sanctuary, right? If not, as you walk out of here, go through the sanctuary on your left, you'll see it. Love God, love neighbor, right? That's what Jesus sums it up as. The scribe seems to get it, right? The scribe said to him, "You are right, teacher. You have truly said that he is one, and beside him there is no other, to love him with the heart and understanding, with all the strength, and to love one's neighbors as oneself. This is much more important than all burnt offerings or sacrifices." You see that in verses 32 through 33 in chapter 12. When Jesus saw, he answered wisely. He said to him, "You are not far from the kingdom of God." And friends, that's how I've always heard that preached. Jesus didn't stop teaching then. He kept going. You are not far off. But Jesus keeps teaching in the temple with the scribes standing right there. And he says, how can the scribes say that the Messiah is the Son of David and not the Son of God? Like what? Now remember, what's Mark's point? Jesus is who? The Messiah, the Son of God, right? But they say he's one but not the other. How can that be? And the large crowd was listening to Jesus with delight because they believe. Jesus continues, beware of the scribes who like to walk around in long robes, to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces, and to have the best seats in the synagogues, box seats at the Astros games, and places of honor at banquet. Oh, I'm sorry, that's not. Oh, sorry. Supposed to be there. I have gotten to sit in box seats at the Astros game. I didn't pay for them though, just so you know. I didn't take it from any widow to do that, right? But it's there, right? And in case that wasn't enough, he just broke down for the scribe how the scribe, you're almost there, but you're not really there. You see, it's then that he walks over to the treasury and he watches all these very rich people putting in their gifts, and he sees how they're giving nothing. And he sees this poor widow come up with 2 coppers. That would be 2 pennies, the text says. And he calls his disciples to him. And he says, all of them have contributed out of their abundance, but she, out of her poverty, has put in everything she had, all she had to live. And he wants to bring the system down because she's putting it into something that won't bear the fruit for which it was designed. You see, he cursed the fig tree because it isn't producing fruit, not because it's not a good-looking fig tree. It looks like something it isn't. And then as they're leaving this last time on that 3rd day, the wrong thing impresses a disciple, right? And as they come out, the disciple sees all the stones. This is a model that's there in Jerusalem where you can go look at a 1st century, what it might have looked like. You can see that the temple's there where the mosque is nowadays. But I just want you to get a feel for what it looked like before the what they call the Messiah gate was all blocked off. It would have been a gate that you could enter right there. But as they're coming out of that, he's seeing this big stone edifice, and he's going, like we do when we go on a tour there, like, wow, look at the grand architecture. This is amazing. And it kind of gets Jesus the wrong way. Jesus says in verse 2 of chapter 13, do you see these great buildings? Not one of them will be left there one upon the other. No stone will be left there one upon the other. All will be thrown down. And they get out of the city back out to where they're staying. And they're in that place. Peter, James, John, and Andrew pull Jesus aside and say, Lord, tell us when this will be. What will be the sign that all things are about to be accomplished? Okay, friends, I don't know how many more signs Jesus can give them, but to break this down over 3 days, to enter as a king, to throw out these people and cleanse as a priest, and then to turn around and teach as a prophet, like what else do they want Jesus to do to give them the sign? But if you want to read some amazing reading, you can read the Bewares of Mark that I won't have time to do tonight. I didn't have time this morning, so don't feel too cheated, but it's there. But it's in chapter 13, verses 5 through 33. I want to give you a flavor for it at its ending, at its height. I know some people will have to run off to choir, but as it ends, it comes in with a simile and a command. Jesus gives all these different bewares and all these different directions, and he comes in with a simile. He said that end that they're expecting, that sign of the time, he said it is like a man going on a journey when he leaves home and puts his slaves in charge, each with his work, and commands the doorkeeper to be on watch. Therefore, keep awake, for you do not know when the master of the house will come, in the evening or at midnight, or at cockcrow or at dawn, or else he may find you asleep when he comes suddenly. And then he gives this command. And what I say to you, I say to all. So remember, he just said all these bewares, and their friends, some of them are kind of judgy. But remember, he's saying that to this subset of the disciples. And he doesn't want them to be like the scribes, the Pharisees, and the chief priests. And additionally, he's saying it to them knowing that he's about to be crucified. All right, it's right before the day where all that's going to go down. But he gives this command, and he says, to all, keep awake. Because what happens the next day when they go in the Garden of Gethsemane? What can the disciples not do? They cannot stay awake. But that's called a setup for next week. See, it's like in volleyball where they bump that up in the air. So real quick, let's run through the reflection questions. Who is Jesus for us? I thought it might be good for us just to ask ourselves this week, what do you look away from that you need to look into? The other thing is, are you not far off or far away? or both. Sometimes we walk up to Jesus full of ourselves and we think we're close, only to realize that we're actually far off and far away. And then the third one was, how do you keep awake? Are there spiritual practices or things you can do to stay alert, to pray, to stay close to Jesus? So friends, thank you very much. The chair was kind of like an umbrella. I had it if I needed it, but I never have an umbrella when I need it. Whenever I have one, it doesn't rain. So it was there. Well, thank you very much. Jennifer Grow will be with y'all to bring us home, and Mark, and I know she's already preparing. She was sending me notes today, and she's right on it. So I'm very excited about that. I do appreciate all the prayers. We'll send an update, when I'm free and clear of everything, of the procedure and stuff. I know Judy will send out something so everybody can know. But I'll take questions.